Welcome back and thank you for joining us. This PowerPoint presentation and the accompanying narration was prepared for East Texas Baptist University for use in the course Criminal Justice 3314 Criminal Investigation, and I am Dr. Eric Hillman. The textbook that we use in this course is entitled Criminal Investigation, 11th edition, by Hess, Orthman, and Cho. The viewing of this presentation by the student is designed to supplement the reading of the textbook and not simply to replace it. Chapter 6 is entitled Obtaining Information and Intelligence. Chapter 6 has been divided into shorter segments for easier online viewing. This is Chapter 6G, the last segment of Chapter 6. We've already talked about interrogation and interviewing and several aspects related to that. We're now going to discuss what happens when you need to question a child victim or a child witness. One thing to keep in mind is children, especially young children, are afraid. The police are authority figures. Some children are taught the police officer is your friend. If you're in trouble, go to the police, he will help you. Other children are taught if you do something bad, the police will take you to jail. And I've seen that while in uniform, where some children wave at me with a smile on their face and other children cry and run away from me, and you can tell what their parents have told them about the police. Children have a different psychology than adults. Their mental abilities haven't been developed in nearly the extent of adult has. Children also have a limited vocabulary, partly because they haven't been exposed to more words, and partly because their parents will choose that limited vocabulary for them. Children tend to want to please. They want to please mom and dad, and they want to please the police. They want people to be happy with them. One of the issues that's really important when questioning children is to know that children are very open to suggestion. You can say almost anything to a child and at the same time nod your head in a yes fashion, and the child will agree with you. If this little girl's name is Amy, you could say, "Is your name Amy?" "Yes." And you could say something like, "Are you 20 years old?" And you shake your head yes, and they will answer yes. Just because they see you shaking your head. They want to please you, and they're open to suggestion. Children, the bottom line is, many times will tell you not so much the truth, but will tell you what they think you want to hear. That's why it's very important when you question child victims and child witnesses to choose your words very carefully. You need to obtain parental permission to question a child victim or witness. Of course, you don't do that if the parent is a suspect. So if a father is accused of sexually molesting his daughter, you wouldn't obviously ask the father for permission. But assuming that the suspect is an outsider, then generally speaking, yes, you do ask parental permission. Child sex crimes, the victims of child sex crimes require specially trained investigators who learn how to question children without being suggestive, to make the answers actually come from the child rather than just have the child agree with the investigator. One thing you're going to have to learn, especially in child sex crime cases, is what words do these children use to describe body parts. A very young child will rarely use words like penis and vagina. They'll use whatever their parents have taught them. And so pee-pee, for instance, is commonly used to describe genitals for boys and girls. We had a case where a girl referred to her private parts as her honeypot. She had lived with her grandmother, and her grandmother always told her, "Don't let any boys see your honeypot or touch your honeypot." And so she was upset, and she was scared, and she felt guilty because a boy had touched her honeypot, and so she thought she had done something wrong. you can use anatomically correct dolls. These are little dolls that have actual private parts on them, both male and female, including pubic hair, etc. And they have these at special investigation locations. We use something called Hillman Center in Houston County, but most counties have an agreement with one of these centers, one of these places that have specially trained investigators to talk to children. And the idea, of course, is to present the anatomically correct doll to see what the child's response is, and then not to suggest things. Don't say, is this what he had? Is this what it looked like? Instead, try to get the child to put it in their own words, so you know that they're not simply agreeing with the suggestion of the investigator. Now, juveniles also can be suspects, and different laws apply to interrogation of juvenile suspects. In most states, it's a different set of laws, including Texas. In civil law, you are an adult at 18, and that's why if you try to buy a car or take out a credit card, they won't let you do it if you're under 18 unless your parent also signs. However, in criminal law, to be charged with a crime, you're considered an adult at 17. So if you committed a crime at 17, you will be charged as an adult in Texas. They don't have to send you from juvenile court to adult court. At 17, you're automatically charged as an adult. If a crime is committed when you're 16 years old, you commit a crime, but the police don't question you about it until you're 17. However, the juvenile rules still apply because the crime was committed at age 16. If a juvenile is not in custody, then the juvenile can be questioned without the Miranda warning. So if you're simply talking to a juvenile on the street, they're not in custody, they're free to leave, you can question them about something without reading their Miranda warning. However, if you take the juvenile into custody, then not only must you read the Miranda warning before questioning, the Miranda warning must be given by a magistrate. A magistrate is a low-level judge. If you take a juvenile into custody, you are required to immediately notify their parents. And if you do questioning and processing of a juvenile suspect in custody, it must be done within 6 hours from the time of taking into custody or arrest till the end of the processing. Texas law requires that juveniles can only be questioned by police in a juvenile processing facility. And with the Houston Police Department, they actually had a juvenile division with separate juvenile detention areas and separate questioning areas from adults. You cannot place juveniles in adult jail facilities with adults. It's not just improper, it's illegal. Juvenile suspects, when they're questioned, should be separated from their friends, because the juveniles may act tough in front of their friends, but if they're alone and they don't have to save face, then they may be more cooperative. These are pictures on the left of 4 juveniles who kidnapped this boy on the right. The boy on the right is mentally retarded. They kidnapped him and tortured him just for fun. So just because they're juveniles doesn't mean that they're not serious criminal offenders. They easily can be. Should parents be allowed in interrogation? Usually not. Parents do have a right to talk to their child, but they don't have a right to be present in the interrogation. So you don't want the parents in the interrogation. Parents differ. Some parents will pressure their child to tell the truth no matter what because it's the right thing to do. But other parents will say, no, do not talk to the police until we get a lawyer, and they're trying to cover up their child's crimes. And that's actually a natural tendency of parents to do. Each of us wants to be protective of our child. Unfortunately, that's not always in the child's best interests. So what should you do? You should talk to the parents first to determine their attitude. If the parents seem very defensive, it's best not to let the parent in the interrogation. If you think, and it's a little bit risky, but if you think the parent will talk the child into telling the truth, then maybe it would be good to have them in there. My feeling is no, you don't let the parents in because they are unpredictable. If during the interrogation the juvenile confesses, the parent may not believe it. The parent may think the police tortured the child or convinced the child against his will to confess. So if you do get the child to confess, then have him confess again with the parent present, so the parent understands their sweet little Johnny, their sweet little Susie, who would never do anything wrong, really did commit this crime. Juvenile law is complicated, both in the statutes and in the court cases. So, if possible, you should let a juvenile specialist handle juvenile cases. With the Houston Police Department, there was actually a juvenile division who did nothing but handle juveniles. And if officers on the street arrested juveniles, they had to bring them to the juvenile division. They could not process them any other place. On the other hand, in small departments, you may not have a juvenile division. You may just have one officer who specializes in juvenile law, or in very small departments, you'd have no juvenile specialist at all. So it is important that you follow the rules. If you don't have a specialist in your small department, then it's worth your while to call the district attorney's office to get advice on how to process a juvenile suspect. You always want corroborating information. Why? Because people lie. Now, when we say corroborating information, we mean after you get a confession, you want to make sure that that is a truthful confession. And so you want to bring the suspect sometimes back to the scene, or at a minimum have the suspect detail in their confession what exactly happened. People lie not just to protect themselves, but sometimes to protect others. Someone may lie to protect a fellow gang member. They may lie to enhance their reputation, so people think that they're a terrible criminal. That's often done when someone's about to go to prison, and they want a reputation as a killer so that other prison gang members will leave them alone. People have hidden motives. You don't know why they're confessing to something. Could be they feel guilty. Could be a different crime that they've committed that they haven't been caught on, and they feel like they psychologically or religiously they need to be punished, so they'll confess to this crime. So if you have a confession in a written statement, in a recorded statement, that's great, but don't just take it at face value. Make sure you get corroboration. Try to prove that the statement is true, or try to prove that it's not true if you think this person is covering for someone else. Perhaps asking them details and finding out they know no details about the crime will show that this person is lying, that really someone else did it and they're just trying to cover for them. Another reason someone may confess to a crime is if someone's, and this happens in prison, if someone's doing life in prison and someone else is only doing 20 years or 10 years, the person doing the shorter sentence might convince the person doing life in prison, hey, confess to this crime, and they'll even give them all the details of the crime. Confess to this crime and say, hey, I committed this murder, I committed this bank robbery too, and you got the wrong guy. Why would they do that? Well, they've already got life or life without parole. They know they're never getting out. And so maybe offered some money or something as simple as commissary items. Candy bars, something that simple, since they already know they can't get out of prison. It won't take much to get them to confess to other crimes so that a fellow prisoner can be released, even though the fellow prisoner is the one that actually did it. And you'd be amazed at how little in reward people will accept to confess to robberies and murders, etc. When you do get the confession, you corroborate it by comparing that confession to the reports, to the evidence, to the pictures, to the criminal records, etc. You have lots of things to work with. You need to determine whether the confession is true or not. Now, if someone is lying and they're confronted with being a liar, they usually get defensive. That may be a sign. Now, even people who tell the truth are also sometimes defensive, but if someone is quite defensive, it might be a sign that they're covering up a lie. If someone has rehearsed a statement, they usually say it to themselves over and over again, word for word, in preparation for their interview or interrogation by the police. And when you ask them multiple times, they will say the same thing word for word. Truthful statements, on the other hand, tend to vary in some details. Why is that? Not major variance, but minor variance, because as they tell the story again, since it's not rehearsed, they may have left something out, or they may have left out a motivation, a small piece of evidence, etc. So small variations in repeat statements is not necessarily an indication of a lie. That could be actually a sign that they're being truthful. So what you want to do is you want to break up these rehearsed responses. Since they're making it up, they have to memorize it in sequence. So you break it up and ask them questions in the middle of their rehearsed statements to take them to different points in time, to different locations, to different subjects, and try to get them to lose track of their rehearsed statement. That way, when they lose track of it, it will become obvious in some cases that it was in fact a rehearsed statement rather than a true statement, because they'll lose their place. These lengthy statements that are deceptive or lies can be oftentimes revealed as a lie if you simply add a little bit of confusion into or break into the rehearsed statement. What about polygraphs? What do polygraphs do? They measure several body functions, including respiration, which is breathing, skin conductivity, electrical impulses, that is, through the skin, blood pressure, and pulse. There's different qualities of instruments, from old ones to new ones, some very complicated and complex technologically, others more simple. Also, the polygraphers who operate the polygraph or lie detector machines have different levels of experience and different levels of education. Some may have advanced degrees as well as a certification, master's degree and 30 years experience. Others may only have a high school degree and has just started this recently. Can you fool the lie detector? Well, yes, in some cases. You can mask your lies with drugs. Why? Because drugs can affect your respiration, blood pressure, pulse, etc. You can make deliberate muscle contractions. If you tense up after every question, then the investigator will not be able to determine which ones you're reacting to and which ones you aren't. Had a story from a polygraph operator that he had someone he was questioning who had a very strong change in muscle contractions during each question, and as it turned out, this guy had stuck a thumbtack in the bottom of his tennis shoes to poke up into his big toe. And so every time he was asked a question, he simply pressed down on his big toe. That caused a pain reaction that interfered with the nervous system and muscle contractions. And he would do that on every question so that the examiner could not distinguish one response from another. If a person has a psychopathic personality, they can be professional liars. It's possible they can lie and have no indication of the lie with a psychopathic personality. So yes, in certain cases it is possible to defeat the lie detector or the polygraph. However, it is still used often because it's very effective in most cases. Now, can you use polygraph results in court? And the answer is no, at least not in Texas. So a polygraph examiner cannot go to court and say, I gave Susie a polygraph exam and she failed it. So because polygraph results are not admissible. However, confessions in a polygraph test are admissible. So this polygraph examiner cannot say, I gave Susie a polygraph test and she failed it. But if, while he's giving her a polygraph test, did you steal the TV? No, I didn't. And then it shows that she's lying. Oh, you failed. You can't fool this polygraph instrument. It says that you're deceiving me. Oh, all right. I admitted I stole it. Well, that's a confession. So this polygraph examiner can go to court now and say, I questioned Susie about stealing the TV and she admitted that she took it. So polygraph results aren't admissible, but if you confess in a polygraph exam, that confession is admissible. Also, polygraph examiners often bluff. For instance, it's common with police departments to have a standard procedure where the polygraph examiner accuses every single police applicant of using marijuana, whether or not they used it or not, because that's a bluff that catches a lot of people. There's a lot of people who use marijuana, a lot of people deny they use it, and when the polygraph examiner, regardless of the results of the test, says, oh, no, you failed that, then many times will say, yeah, you're right, I used marijuana. And so they are allowed to bluff. They are allowed to tell you results during the exam that aren't true to try to get you to confess. Even though polygraph results are not admissible in court, sometimes a prosecutor is undecided about whether he will file a case, and so he orders a polygraph or requests a polygraph. The defense attorney agrees, the person takes the polygraph, and if they pass the polygraph, meaning no deception is indicated, the DA may decide to not file the case. If they fail the polygraph, the DA, district attorney, may decide to file charges. And that can be used in his decision-making process, but the evidence, the results of the polygraph are not admissible in court. The judge and the jury do not get to hear about the results of the polygraph. What about hypnosis? Can that be used as part of a criminal investigation? Well, actually, yes, it can. 21 states, including Texas, allow the use of hypnosis in criminal investigations. When a police department decides to use hypnosis, it's used on victims and witnesses, not suspects, and it's used to enhance the memories. The idea is the person has a memory of what happened, but it's way down there in the subconscious mind somewhere, and hopefully hypnosis will allow the brain to retrieve that memory. It's not used on suspects. Hypnosis involves a relaxation technique to help with the person's memory. The hypnotist in Texas must record the session to make sure they aren't being too suggestive. The hypnotist must know as little as possible about the investigation, and that's so that the hypnotist does not use leading questions. And so the police only give minimal facts to the hypnotist, and the hypnotist then asks those questions. And this is what they call blind questioning. the hypnotist is blind to most of the facts of the case, so he can't be too suggestive. Hypnotists are actually certified by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. They have to take a 50-hour course to get a certification to be a state-certified hypnotist, and they have to take a refresher course in hypnotism every 2 years. In case you're wondering, hypnosis is rarely used. In all the years of being a police officer, I've never seen hypnosis used in any case. I just want you to be aware that it is legal to use it in Texas. There are certain investigation dangers that you need to be aware of. Your goal, of course, is to prevent wrongful convictions. So you have to always keep an open mind. You may have an idea of what you think happened. That's called your theory of the case. It's important not to become married. What we mean by that is permanently attached to a certain theory of the case. If it is a theory, then you gather evidence to see if the theory is true. But if the evidence goes against your theory, maybe it's time to think of a new theory. Sometimes investigators have a theory that they're married to, meaning they're going to stick with it, and they get evidence that's contrary to their theory. So instead of saying, maybe my theory is no good, they will say to themselves, well, maybe this evidence is no good. Well, that's a little bit dangerous because that causes the investigator to ignore any evidence that is contrary to his preconceived idea. A good investigator has to be willing to admit that he is wrong. Nothing wrong with that. That's a sign of strength, not weakness. If there are problems with your theory, if there are holes in it, then you need to be willing to explore new ideas. The problem with investigators who aren't willing to admit they're wrong is that it ends up being the case that hundreds of innocent people are convicted and sent to prison. Why? Because the investigator's ego is, well, if they're innocent, how could they be sent to prison? Because juries trust police officers. And if this police officer ignores evidence he shouldn't have ignored and sounds confident enough in weak evidence, then the jury oftentimes will believe him too. So you don't want to be the cause of wrongful convictions. You don't want someone to spend 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years in prison who was actually innocent just because your ego wouldn't let you get rid of a faulty theory and your ego wouldn't let you explore good evidence because it was contrary to your preconceived notions. The Innocence Project looked at the first 225 exonerations based on DNA. So, of everyone who was found guilty in a court of law and then DNA later proved that they weren't the actual culprit, so these people are proven not to be guilty, they looked at the first 25 and they found out that most, over 3/4 of them, were misidentified by witnesses. Witnesses who thought that the person in the lineup was the right person, but wasn't. The witness who thought that the person the police brought back to the case was guilty, but in fact they weren't. The second most common cause was improper forensics. People using crime scene investigation or forensics ideas that were not validated and not proven. The third most common, false confessions, and we've already talked about that in a little bit of detail. People will confess to things they didn't do for a variety of reasons. And the fourth most common was informants or snitches who were lying. If you tell someone they're looking at 20 years in prison, but you'll cut that down to 5 years if they will make 3 other, say, drug cases on you. Well, if this person is looking at spending 5 years in prison instead of 20, then they will do whatever they can to make those cases. And even if it's not a strong case, they will say it is. So you can't always trust informants and snitches. They may have their own agenda. And that's the end of Chapter 6G, and actually the entire end of Chapter 6. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.